Could I please have document behind tab 408 on the screen again? Yes, that's right, thank you. Doctor, before the adjournment, I was asking you, I'd taken you to the part of this email where AWI had said she'd hoped you'd have commenced a thorough investigation of the allegations, and I was asking you what you considered to constitute a thorough investigation.
So I had listed the resource of the hospital, the clinical staff, the head of the child protection unit, to firstly identify the surname of Harry, and then to discover that he was still a volunteer at the Royal Children's Hospital, and to stand him down and report the matter to the police. Mm-hmm. That was what happened in that week.
Right. Given that the allegations were of child sexual abuse which took place on Ward 8 East in 1981, did the hospital undertake any inquiries in relation to that abuse?
The abuse of AWI?
Yes.
AWI had provided us with the details of the abuse, and I took them at face value, and I identified who Harry was, and as we've just discussed, stood him down and reported him to police on the basis of the allegation made. I think that in my mind, the allegation made was substantial, serious, and significant enough to take those actions without interrogating Harry. I think it was there was enough evidence, information to proceed as I did.
Right. So are you agreeing that internally within the hospital no investigation of the events from 1981 took place?
No, I can't answer that exactly. I know what information came to me, and I know that Harry's surname was established. How that was established and by how many people and in what circumstances, I don't know how that happened. Mm.
On the evidence that you've had available to you in terms of getting your statement together, mm-hmm. Is there any documentary evidence that the hospital itself undertook any investigations into the allegations of the sexual abuse that took place in 1981?
No, I think that was, from our perspective, it was a police matter.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, just at the bottom of that first page there in the document that's on the screen, can I ask you to scroll down? AWI has said, "I will be happy to assist you in any way to try and track down the man in question, and if you have any questions, I will try to answer." You'd agree she's been very clear now about wanting to engage in this process.
Yes.
And positively contribute.
Yes.
Now, at paragraph 24 of your statement, you state that Mr Pouchel was stood down from the hospital sometime between the 17th of December 1997 and the 24th of December 1997. And there's certainly documentary evidence for that in the police information sheet that is behind tab 409. So could I please have tab 409 on the screen? Now, just looking at the top of that document, Doctor, it's the Victoria Police Crime Department Child Exploitation Squad information report. Mm-hmm. And if you scroll down a little bit further, there's a heading there saying information. Mm-hmm. And then it says, information received on the 24th of December 1997 from, and then there's a redacted name there, and after that it says Gatehouse Clinic of the Royal Children's Hospital. Can you tell the Commission what the Gatehouse Clinic is?
Yes, the hospital had a child protection unit for a number of years, which as long as I can remember. I was there since 1980. I think it was probably around all that time. Unfortunately, the hospital dealt with physical abuse very regularly of its patients coming to the hospital, and it was deemed in that period that there was a need for a special unit to oversee the care of these children, and particularly their non-medical care and the engagement with government and various government agencies. So the Child Protection Unit had been established, and about 93 from the documents, it changed its name to the Gatehouse Centre, the Gatehouse being the name of the street next to the hospital. I presume in an effort to remove any stigma from child protection, child abuse, and to leave it as the Gatehouse Centre, so people could visit or be cared for by the Gatehouse Centre in a non-stigmatised way. So the Gatehouse Centre was the overseeing, coordinating unit. Didn't replace the medical teams, but it coordinated the care, because the care of physically and sexually abused children is quite complex and requires the engagement of multiple agencies. So that's the multidiscipline team within the hospital that cares for child abuse in the hospital.
Right. And do you have, I can see that the name's been redacted out, but do you have any idea of who it is, the role of the person might have been?
I think that would have been the head of the Gatehouse Centre, the person who I knew as part of the leadership group of the hospital, and I would expect that would be her,
right,
whose name has been redacted. Yes.
And do you have any recall of going to that person and discussing this matter?
No, I don't have a recall of a particular meeting with her, but you can see from the documents I have mentioned her name several times, and so I hence imagine that I have met with her, talked with her and sought her advice, given her involvement across multiple documents.
I know you say somewhere in your statement, and just for clarity, do you have much independent recollection of what occurred?
No, I don't have much independent recollection at all. When the matter was first raised with me last year, I could remember the word Japan, I think, and the documents are, quite detailed. So fortunately, and so now I can. I know from the documents what happened, and I can match the times. Yeah. But I don't have a direct recollection of the events other than via the multiple documents.
Okay. Now, the second line of that first paragraph there says that the suspect is Harry Otto Puchel. So it would appear by at least the 24th of December that, in fact, the surname of Harry had been identified. Yep. Now, I'll just refer to them as Informer, because that says redacted Informer. Informer states that a female identified as AWI has sent an email to the Children's Hospital complaining that during 1981 she was hospitalised for chronic asthma. During this time, a volunteer worker at the hospital she knew as Harry indecently assaulted her. So it's certainly at that time those pieces had been pulled together. Correct. In the next paragraph it says, the victim, AWI, is residing in Japan at this stage, may not wish to take the matter further. Now, at the 24th of December 1997, there was no reason for the hospital to believe, was there, that AWI may not wish to take the matter further?
Well, AWI had expressed both views, as we've been through just recently. In the first email, she indicated that she may not have the strength or wish to take it further. And in the second email, she says she now feels she has the strength to take it further. So that we had two views, and both were respected, I think.
Well, the latter, more recent view, though, was in fact she would do what it would take. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct.
Now, then it says AWI will be in Australia from the 20th of January 1998 onwards and will contact the Children's Hospital. So it's letting the police know that she, in fact, will be in Australia at some time.
Yeah, the date's wrong, you'll see, but that's true. We are letting the police know that she will be in Australia.
Now, there's a comment here. Informer has been informed to attempt to have AWI meet investigators in this office. Now, there's no evidence at all, is there, that AWI was ever asked to make contact with the police and meet them in the office, is there?
No, there was no opportunity to ask her that. I had anticipated a meeting with her, and that meeting, as you know, didn't take place. And then she'd returned to Japan. So in the 19th to the 30th, there was an anticipated meeting where a lot of things might have been covered, but were not. And as you, so I can agree with what you say, but it's in a context.
Well, Doctor, in the very first email she sent you, she gave you her telephone number, didn't she?
That's a very interesting question. I didn't recognise her telephone number till I saw her statement on the Anzac Day, roughly, this year. I had read her non-redacted statement several times, and there is a number under her name. It's not a number that strikes me as a phone number, and there's no. It turns out that it has a Japanese prefix, and I didn't recognise that as a phone number. No one pointed out to me that it might be a phone number, and even in recent times, no one recognised that as a phone number. So that's a huge sadness, really, that the phone number was there from the very first email, and I didn't recognise that collection of numbers as a phone number.
Are you suggesting, Doctor, that with the resources and might of the Children's Hospital, that it couldn't think of a way to contact AWI if it wanted to?
Well, AWI had said in her original email that she wanted a reply by email. So I need to respect that wish that that's what she's written. I had second last paragraph, if you're looking for it. I need to respect her wishes. We had a successful interchange by email, over at least two emails anyway, two from her, and she's only seen one of mine. I came to believe that she was comfortable with that form of correspondence, and I wasn't aware that she hadn't seen all of my emails, so I wasn't aware that I needed to try plan B.
Mm-hmm. Don't you consider that the position changed between email number 1 and email number 2 in terms of AWI's willingness to be engaged in the process?
Yes, absolutely.
And looking back now at this police statement, this police information report, where it says that the police had informed somebody from the hospital to attempt to have AWI meet investigators from the hospital. Looking back now, do you regret that you didn't take further steps to make contact with Miss AWI and encourage her to go to the police?
I do regret that I didn't have contact with her. I obviously had made multiple attempts to contact her, but she hadn't received those attempts. The person giving the or talking with police here, we both think is the head of the Gatehouse Centre, and it's the same person that I'd asked AWI to meet with me at the hospital, so that there was sort of a closed loop as to who had been to the police, who had told them what they'd said, and that information could have been readily available to AWI had we met in the last 10 days of January.
Did you ever send an email to Miss AWI stating that the police are keen to talk to her?
No, I did not.
And why didn't you do that?
Because I anticipated meeting her when I sent an email on the 19th of January. It's my, I think, last email we've got a copy of. And that was anticipating a soon meeting, and it wasn't an email, I don't think, other than to report that the police have been involved, so that she would know that. Wasn't the right opportunity, I don't think, to go into a detailed discussion, because I was anticipating a meeting with her and the head of the Gatehouse Centre in coming days.
After the meeting fell through, did at any point you think it important for her to know that even though your meeting fell through, that the police were keen to speak to her? That would have been good for her to know, as I say. Any time it would have been good for her to know that the police were involved and he had been terminated and stood down. All those facts would have been very helpful to AWI. I can see that now, and I've said as much in my statement. I don't know what I said in the subsequent email, because we don't have that, and I won't speculate on what might have been said. Okay. Now, the next paragraph on that page, which starts the word Harry, Harry has not yet been positively identified, but all information tends to point towards a current serving volunteer at the hospital. So this is information that's been shared with the police at that time. Given that this person has been at the hospital for many years, the potential for numerous victims is high. Was that potential on the hospital's mind at the time?
As I said, I don't recall that. It's I mean, it's a policeman's opinion there, and it's on my mind now, but I don't recall it at the time, and there is certainly no documentation to say that I recall it or was on my mind at the time. I was certainly focused on AWI. It may have been that others in their investigation had considered that, but I have got no documents that I considered that at the time. Right.
So at the time, when you received a complaint containing an allegation of child sexual abuse which occurred on a ward with an inpatient, at the time you weren't concerned, in fact, there may have been other victims?
I can't remember about that. No. I can reflect on it and think that's very important, but I can't remember what happened at the time.
Now, also in this paragraph it says, at this stage the following suspect has been stood down from the hospital, and this person has not been informed of the reasons for his supervision.
Suspension, I suspect.
That's right, yes. And that's what the hospital had told the police at this time. Mm-hmm. Now, is there anything on that page that suggests that this was a referral from the hospital to the police for an investigation into allegations of child sexual abuse in 1981?
I'm not sure I understand the question. The page is the Children's Hospital informing a relevant police group that a patient had been abused and giving the police the name of that person, and then they started to look into it. I think that's what it is. I don't know if it's a notification or an information or a request for help or a complaint. It's all of the above, I suspect.
There's nothing suggesting that the hospital was inviting an inquiry into the events of 1981. Is there?
I think that's implicit in notifying the police of an abuse of a child, and you'll note over the page that the police visit the hospital and to do something, presumably start an investigation, and over the page they do various other things to track down Harry. So they are investigating Harry from what I see as a layperson. The police are investigating Harry.
Well, let's turn over the page then. At the top of page 2, there is an investigator comment. Sergeant McIntosh and Sergeant Smith have attended Royal Children's Hospital, inspected a computer donated by suspect to hospital and used by some to entertain children. Nil found computer is very old Apple Mac type, collected business type card produced by suspect and handed to children, PAX cards, and immigration details are being obtained, inquiries pending further. Now, on the basis of this, there's no suggestion that the police were inquiring into the sexual abuse that took place in 1981, is there?
I won't say I'm not a lawyer, of course it's a silly thing to say, but there's some work going on by police to find out who Harry is, and for what other purpose would they be doing it other than there was a report of abuse?
Well, Doctor, they already knew who Harry was, didn't they?
That's right.
That wasn't part of the inquiry, was it?
No, they were doing things to find out stuff about Harry, and I imagine they're doing that because of the abuse. I don't know why they would be doing it.
Mm-hmm. Now, Doctor, are you suggesting you were satisfied at the time that the police were undertaking inquiries in relation to the 1981 abuse?
Well, all I can know is what the documents tell me, and my interpretation of the documents is that the police were informed of abuse, given the person's name of given the abuser's name, and that is their area of expertise. What they did with it, I can't judge, other than my role was to make sure that they knew.
Well, Doctor, there is no evidence at all, is there, that Puchel was ever confronted with the allegations? That's right?
Not by the hospital staff, and I find the police documents a little difficult to work through as to who did what when. There seems to be some work about finding out his address and things like that. I don't find any evidence that they visited him in those 2 pages.
That's right. And there's no evidence at all that they ever spoke to the victim either, is there?
No, there's not.
Right. So what type of an investigation were you thinking they were conducting if they didn't speak to the suspect and they didn't speak to the victim?
Well, the police documents were only provided to me this year. I didn't know at the time what exactly they were doing, and so this document portrays what they were doing at the time.
At the time, once the contact had been made with the police, did you entirely let it go and then not follow up, with the progress of the police investigation?
There's a there's a note, I think, further down in this document.
Yes, there is, Doctor.
That says that the hospital was again in touch with the police, and it's, the dates, of course, we can't follow, but there's a comment that AWI was satisfied and would not take the matter further, or words to that effect. So that there's record of another engagement with the police at a time, looks like in January, but I couldn't be sure. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say that it had been let go, because there was at least some written proof, yes, fortunately, that there was a later engagement, mm-hmm, with the police, with further information provided by the redacted person to police, which they have dutifully recorded.
Mm-hmm. Now, further down, back to your statement, Doctor, at paragraph 27, you've stated that on the 24th of December 1997, that you again emailed AWI and asked her to contact you upon arrival in Melbourne, and you stated that you'd arranged for the head of the child abuse unit to join you. Mm-hmm. Now, at the bottom of that same paragraph, you've said, I did not inform AWI that Mr. Puchel had been identified and stood down. In retrospect, I should have done so because this would be something Ms. AWI would have wanted to know.
Yep.
So why didn't you tell her you'd identified him?
I was... well, I know myself, so I guess... explaining my thinking as best I can, that I was overly cautious. I had an allegation which I'd handed on to police, and perhaps they were the ones to establish the truth or not of the allegation. I should have at least told AWI that we suspected, or strongly suspected, rather than we had found proven, because that's for others to prove. But I at least could have mentioned to her that we had found a person that might have been the suspect. Mm. And I think that was, I was overly cautious about that. And I could have chosen words that would have left me feeling comfortable, but more importantly, would have left AWI feeling some comfort about that. Of course, she didn't get the email anyway, but nevertheless, yes, it would have been the right thing for her, and would have saved her another 4 years of sorrow, pain. Yeah.
When you use the word caution...
Yeah, cautious. Yeah.
Cautious.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on what you're trying to protect, or what?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to be, fair to everyone, and an allegation is just that, and it needs to be treated with respect, as we have. But we also live in the society where innocent till proved guilty, and I don't want to write down things about an abuser unless I've got some certainty, and the certainty comes from others. We have institutions that decide that, and I didn't want to be the judge and jury over these matters. Mm-hmm. So I was overly cautious, but I could have used words that dealt with that concern, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm. And is that same caution related to not telling her that he'd been stood down?
It's the same. I mean, the identification of the surname, the stood down, and the subsequent termination, I was cautious about all those things. I wasn't cautious about telling her about the police, because that would be a normal... It's not naming someone, it's telling her about a good process that's underway. Yes. So I didn't have that same caution with regard to the police.
Mm-hmm. Okay. At paragraph 27 of your statement, you say that on the 19th of January, you again emailed AWI, and there's a copy of that email behind tab 410 of the tender bundle. So could I ask for that statement to be shown on the screen? Now, there you have at the top of the screen the date on which that email was sent, which is the 19th of January. Now, you've said here, dear Ms. AWI, I understand from Alan Studley that he spoke to you while you were in Australia. If you were still in Australia, please feel free to visit me. So you're extending that opportunity to meet with you to her at the time. Then again, you say, we cannot be sure that we've identified Harry, but we have, I think probably the word is involve the police to assist us, and things will evolve over the coming weeks. So that's what you're referring to in terms of the information that you'd given the police and what you can see set out in that document that I earlier had on the screen. You then go on to say, I don't believe there is any prospect of court action and the associated publicity because identification and proof are very difficult. Now, Doctor, it's simply not right, is it, that identification is difficult in this case?
No, I don't think so. On reflection, I don't think so.
Now, to suggest that identification was difficult in this case misrepresents the situation to AWI, doesn't it?
It's said in a context like everything. You recall that in her earlier letters, which we've already discussed, that she was hesitant about moving forward. That sentence balances the one before it, I think. The sentence before is, we've involved the police. So that might have been concerning to AWI. It turns out it was good for her, but it might have been concerning. Yeah, I couldn't judge that, obviously. The second sentence is like a balance to that. We've gone to the police, sorry. We've gone to the police. That might be worrying her. Then the balancing sentence is the one you've just read out. It's to give a balanced reply to a person I've never seen who I'm not sure which things will worry her and which things won't worry her. But I need to convey information so that it's balanced and not. It's of course different if you're talking with someone, but in a delicate situation, I wanted to give a balanced reply so that she doesn't think one thing or the other, and as we know, she didn't see it anyway. But that's, I think, a reasonable purpose of that email, again, taken as a whole, not word by word.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, where you've said, I don't believe there's any prospect of court action, you'd agree that as a medical practitioner, you're not in a position to give AWI legal advice as to prospects of success of either a criminal prosecution?
Sure.
And you're not in a position to give her any advice as to prospects of success of any civil litigation?
No.
And you'd agree in saying in this email, I don't believe there is any prospect of court action, that might have been discouraging AWI to take any action in relation to the police or courts?
It may have been, but you'll see that I wanted to visit, I wanted her to speak to me about other matters and this email. So whilst we are examining it sentence by sentence, the email stands as a whole in my mind, and as you've pointed out, I'm not a lawyer, but taken as a whole, It was an engaging email to, can I meet you? This is where we're up to. It wasn't meant to be a summary, but an engagement and I want to meet you email.
So do you agree that stating, I don't believe there's any prospect of court action, etc., do you agree that that is a discouragement to AWI to pursue those avenues?
Taken by itself, yes.
Now, you didn't receive any further correspondence from AWI following this particular email, did you?
That's unclear, I think. In the subsequent documents written to John Snowden, there's a reference that I attached a subsequent email from AWI. And it says attachment at the bottom, and so there may have been another email from AWI, but we don't have that in the documents.
Now,
the same, I presume, as we just discussed before, the same email or potential email, you're asking me which ones I sent to her. I sent one more to her, apparently, on the 6th, in the documents. There's the ones I sent to her you asked me about, didn't you?
the ones you sent to her.
Okay, yes. There is reference to another email, which we don't have.
That's right. My question to you, Doctor, was you didn't obtain another email from Ms. AWI after that last one?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I did. Well, there's a document again, another document to Mr. Snowden, which says I attach the latest email from AWI, and there's no attachment in the pack.
Well, Doctor, can I ask you to look at paragraph 34C of your statement, and is that the email? Correct me if I'm wrong, but in that paragraph you refer to attaching an email that you sent to AWI.
That's right.
Now, in this statement of yours, is there any suggestion that there is another email from AWI?
I think there is. Is it above that or below that? It's certainly in the document pack. You might have to scroll the other way to see if it's there, but just because there were three letters to John Snowden. And I think it's the 11th of February one. I wrote to John Snowden attaching correspondence from AWI, separate to the one above, which was the pack of emails. So A is the pack of emails, and 11th of February is a single email, but it's not in the. But the email is not attached to the letter. But that's the letter I'm referring to, 11th of February.
Okay.
And it says that, and that's why I drew the link to the police report of around the same date.
Yes, good. Okay. Now, at paragraph 32 of your statement, you state that you do not have any specific recollection of the investigation that was undertaken following AWI, following her email to you. And then at the bottom of that same paragraph in 32, you say, it is clear that investigations resulted in the identifying the person, standing him down, reporting to police and terminating his services as a volunteer. Now, at that point, there was still no evidence that the hospital had investigated the events that took place in 1981, is there?
No, I'm not sure that that was our role to investigate. I think that was the police role to investigate. I don't think we were investigators.
That's right. And there's also no evidence that, in fact, that the hospital had reported the alleged sexual abuse to the police for the purpose of investigation of that abuse.
I don't know the answer to that question.
It's correct that Puchel was never made aware of the allegations by the hospital of the allegations against him. And it's the case that in terminating the services of Puchel as a volunteer in the manner that the hospital did, it left it open for Puchel to work elsewhere as a volunteer.
Your Honour, please, just in relation to that question, I wonder if it's quite right to ask this witness, first of all, questions about what the police did, but more importantly, from that document itself, the information report, I'm not sure that it's also fair to put that the police did not ever approach Mr Puchel. Now, I'm not saying positively that he was or he was not approached, but I just wonder if that question could be rephrased a little.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think the actual question that you've risen to object to doesn't concern the police. Just
I'm happy to have a go at whatever question it was, but
well, I think I can answer it too. But you can answer it.
So, could you just tell me the question again? Sorry.
I asked you whether in terminating the services of Puchel as a volunteer from the Children's Hospital in the manner it did, it left it open for Puchel to work with children elsewhere.
That's possible, I think, yes.
Now, could I ask for that same document behind tab 409 to be put onto the screen again? And to scroll down to the second half of the second page. Now, Doctor, earlier in your evidence you referred to the fact that there was likely to have been further contact of the hospital with the police because there were notations in a police information about that, and I'm wondering whether this here is what that is. Now, I will take you to it. There's a heading, Investigators Comment, and it says here, spoke to, and then it's redacted, who stated that AWI, victim, had been in contact with the hospital and was satisfied with actions taken by RCH to prevent continuing employment by suspect. Now, Doctor, your evidence is she was never told of the actions taken by the hospital. That's right, isn't it?
Well, we're missing one of the emails. In the emails that you've got and that we've been through, I haven't told her that the suspect has been stood down or terminated. There is reference to two emails which we don't have, one to and one from, which neither party has. Right. So as far as you're concerned, on the evidence that you have available to you, you don't today, on the documents that are available, you have no reason to believe she was satisfied with the actions of the hospital. Well, I have no reason to disbelieve the informant either. I mean, there are two opinions of whether AWI was satisfied or not. There's hers, which we've heard this morning, and she's clearly not satisfied and wasn't told.
Yes.
And I regret that. However, to be, factual, there are other documents, such as this one, and the note to the John Snowden, which indicate that other things had happened, but we don't know the details. This is the most factual, probably, of them all, because there's interesting. The word "satisfied" is used there, and I use the word "satisfactory" in my correspondence. I don't know the basis of those two words.
Yes.
We don't have those documents.
No. And in the next sentence it says, does not wish to pursue matter further or involve police. And again, on the documents currently available, there is no evidence that in fact she doesn't wish, aside from this, Doctor, but on the rest of the documents, there is no evidence that she was contacted and in fact indicated that she didn't want to take the matter further.
Well, the answer is yes and no, isn't it? Because I wouldn't want to dwell on a one-line letter I've written to the lawyers saying that AWI, the situation appears satisfactory, which it's another thread of evidence, but it's not sufficient to say that what I had told AWI or what she was feeling, it's a thread of evidence, that's all.
At paragraph 33 of your statement, you say that on the 22nd of January 1998 that you attended a board meeting. Now, the document that you refer to in that paragraph is behind tab 434 of the tender bundle. Could I please have that on the screen? And could you scroll down to the bottom of page 2? And you can stop there. Now, you refer to the minutes where you raised the issue of AWI at this meeting. Are these the minutes that you're referring to?
That's correct.
Now, you've stated here that, well, the minutes state here that the CEO, and that was you?
Correct.
Informed the board about a complaint/concern raised by a former patient affecting the patient's stay in the Royal Children's Hospital during the 1980s. Now, this complaint/concern was a very specific and detailed allegation of child sexual abuse, wasn't it?
It was.
Do you think that to have it referred to as a complaint/concern misrepresents the gravity and the seriousness of what it is that's being referred to?
It could do, yes.
At the bottom of that paragraph in the minutes there, it says, the chairman has been fully briefed and all correspondence has been placed with Phillips Fox solicitors. Now, has that meant that there's no record at the hospital at all of the content of the allegations that have been made?
Well, I couldn't speak to if anyone had a copy of it, but you'll note in the information pack, at that time, I think on the same day, placed a notice in her unit record history as to where the documents could be found if they needed to be found. So the spot where the documents the spot where the documents were kept was clearly identified in her record. Mm-hmm. You'll also note in the pack that copies of some of that correspondence to the solicitor was kept in the hospital support unit, which is a management area in the hospital, and you'll see it was filed medico-legal by the person who handled medico-legal. But there was a paper trail of where things were and where they were kept for safekeeping, and fortunately they were.
Well, there's certainly a paper trail in the sense that there's something that indicates there is confidential information in relation to AWI kept elsewhere, but there's nothing in relation to the contents of the allegations on the hospital file.
No, the actual correspondence from AWI is not in her history, only a note saying where it can be found. I'd used that technique previously, so it wasn't foreign to me to put a note like that.
In terms of Mr. Pouchel's file, there was no link made between the allegation and the fact that the suspect was Mr. Pouchel?
No, there was no note in AWI's file of Harry's name.
And have you indicated anywhere that you sought to have some notation or some information recorded in Mr. Pouchel's file that the allegation had been made?
No, not to my knowledge.
Now, at paragraph 34, paragraph B of your statement, you said that on the 11th of February 1998 that you wrote to Mr. Snowden attaching correspondence from AWI, and you stated that the situation was satisfactory. You said that you believe there was a reference, you say, I believe this was a reference to the fact that I was satisfied I'd done everything I could arising out of AWI's email to you to investigate the allegation and support AWI. Now, in relation to you doing everything you could to investigate the allegation, are you saying that you've done everything, that what it is you did there was to call the police and give them the information that you did?
Correct.
And in relation to supporting AWI, were you satisfied that you'd supported her to the extent that she sought support?
I've clearly not done enough to support AWI. I think that her statement this morning would make that clear, although she didn't receive my emails of support or help or information or communication. This B here refers to a letter with an attached email which is not attached. So I don't know what AWI might have said to me about her feelings at that time, and I won't speculate what might have happened. But other than to say that I felt comfortable that she was feeling comfortable.
At paragraph 39, paragraph C of your statement, you've referred to the issues of compensation and potential support that you had given AWI. And at the end of that paragraph, you say, by identifying Mr. Pouchel, immediately reporting the allegation to the police, agreeing to meet with Ms. AWI and terminating the Children's Hospital's relationship with Mr. Pouchel, I believe that the hospital responded to Ms. AWI's requests. Now, looking back at the steps you took at that time, are you satisfied you did everything that was appropriate to be done at the time?
No. If I'd called her, that would have been good. If I'd had told her the person had potentially been identified or nearly identified, that would have been much, much better. If I'd actually met with her, that would have been fabulous. Mm. So I fell down in a number of areas. The most lamentable is that AWI didn't actually receive 3 or 4 emails from me that I was thinking that she had received, and that's a huge shock to find out on April 24 this year that that correspondence hadn't been seen by AWI. Mm-hmm. And I may well have done, if I knew that, I could have done a lot of things differently, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Now, at paragraph 41 of your statement, you say on the 21st of January 1998 that you signed a letter that was addressed to Mr. Puchel terminating his services as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. Now, that letter is behind tab 411. Could I please have that on the screen? Now, you can see the date just rolled by. It's the 21st of January, and that's the statement the letter you're referring to?
Correct.
And if we could scroll down and just have the middle part of that letter on the screen, please. So in the second paragraph there, you've said to Mr. Puchel, I understand that you've been spoken to in the past about boundaries to be observed by volunteers following breaches of same by yourself. And the breaches have included giving a significant gift to a patient and personal involvement with patients and or families. Now, again, at the paragraph underneath that, you've also said, it has recently come to my attention that you've printed personalised cards which have been handed out at the hospital, and that prior to the Christmas break, you failed to record your departure time and return your identification badge. Then, having regard to the aforementioned breaches of the volunteer service guidelines, I must advise that your services as a volunteer attending the hospital will not be required in the future. Now, this letter doesn't set out any of the allegations of the serious criminal conduct that had been made about him, did it?
No.
Now, this document did remain on the hospital files then, didn't it?
I'm not sure where it was filed, but presumably it was filed in his record or in the volunteer record area.
So, insofar as the hospital was aware, these are the reasons that Mr. Puchel's services were no longer required by the hospital.
The letter was to Mr. Purcell to ensure that he left the hospital on that day and never returned. That was my purpose. There is another purpose, of course, recording facts in files, but this letter was to terminate his services, so there could be no doubt or debate about that, because the policies were in my gift, and he had breached the policies set out in the manuals, and hence he could be terminated with immediate effect without debate. And that is the purpose of the letter. As you say, there may be other purposes in hospital records to prevent him coming back, or for the reason for termination would be known, and that I think is a shortcoming. But for this letter, it achieves its purpose, achieves my purpose, in to make sure that this person was no longer at the hospital and that was not open for debate.
Well, Doctor, if this letter is sitting in a hospital file and if 6 months later Mr Puchel returns to the hospital and says, can I please do volunteer work, or could I please assist in some other way, and this is the only record of Mr Puchel's work in the hospital, there's no indication to the person that's considering hiring him or allowing him to work within the hospital that this person was the subject of very serious allegations in relation to child sexual abuse.
That's right. But that would be a particular risk in the longer term, whatever that is, if that was the only record of why he was dismissed. I agree.
Doctor, while you were at the hospital, was it, did anyone ever think of having a register of volunteers?
There was, sorry, there is a list of volunteers. I know that because every year I gave out the Long Service Awards for volunteers, and so there's a careful record of how many years people have worked there.
It would be possible to use that register, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, for notation, and without doubt. And there was very careful record keeping of who was a volunteer for the purposes I've just explained.
Right, so for the purposes of making sure that the wrong people didn't come back.
Yeah, the same very carefully kept register could be used for that purpose as well.
Yeah.
Your Honour, I have a number of more questions for the doctor. I'll go on another 5 minutes of this. Doctor, at paragraph 43 of your statement, you refer to a document which is dated the 1st of July 1999, and that document is behind tab 416 of the tender bundle. If I could have that on the screen. So that's a document dated the 1st of July 1999, and it appears to come from an auxiliaries office. Could you explain what an auxiliaries office is?
Yep. The hospital is supported by a number of groups that we've talked about today. The volunteer group who work in the hospital on a volunteer basis, assisting various departments, be it with photocopying or entertaining, or a whole range of research activities even. They were typically called pinkies because they wore a pink uniform, and that's the volunteers, and there's volunteer guidelines and the like. Auxiliaries were a fundraising arm of the hospital, often worked outside the hospital in country towns, in suburbs, that would support the hospital, for instance, the Royal Children's Hospital Auxiliary from Ballarat or Bendigo. So regionally based auxiliaries, or they could be cause-based facilities. As auxiliary that supports the bone ward or the haematology ward, or likewise. Their role was, by and large, outside the hospital, and had a fundraising objective. So and there were those, because there were multiple of them, they had a coordinator, and you'll see below that there's a coordinator of auxiliaries. Okay.
Now, in answer to His Honour's question in relation to a register of volunteers, did such a register exist at the time that the allegations were made?
For For the volunteers, yes, that did exist and had existed for at least 25 years for volunteers.
And so Mr Pouchel's name would have been on that register, is that right?
On the volunteers register,
Yes.
yes.
And when, at the time that he was told his services were no longer required, is there any evidence that in some way there was some notification on that register in any of the documents before?
To the any notification on the volunteers register?
Yes.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Now, in terms of the auxiliaries office, would the people that allow people to work in that service, would they be aware of the volunteers register?
Well, firstly, to make the point that the auxiliary people don't work in the hospital, they work outside the hospital. But, whether they are aware of who the members of the volunteers are, it's obvious from the document that the head is aware, but wouldn't necessarily be routinely aware of who was on the volunteers list because their work was sort of in the community. The auxiliaries worked in the community. It happens from this document that the auxiliaries head is aware of what has happened to one volunteer and has meshed that information together. I'm not sure how that happened, but it fortuitously did happen that Harry had lied his way into the hospital on that date.